Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. Today, it's a topic that you specifically requested. We're diving into the world of communication and learning disorders.
Ah, yes.
You want the whole breakdown, different types, the latest research, and how it all applies in real life. So, yes, strap yourselves in. We've got a lot to cover.
It really is fascinating how intertwined these two areas are. Communication disorders, we often see those diagnosed in early childhood. And then as kids go through school, bam, learning disorders might pop up.
Two sides of the same coin, maybe.
Yeah, exactly.
And we've got these great case studies to, really help us understand this whole landscape. We're going to meet Caleb, who's fantastic at art, building things, all that, but reading, that's a struggle for him.
Right.
And then there's Francine. She can read like a champ, but numbers, forget it. And social cues, well, those can be a bit of a mystery for her, too.
Yeah, their stories and so many others like them really highlight why understanding these disorders is just so crucial. And not just for, slapping a label on it, but for creating the right support system.
Because a label's only useful if it leads to action, right?
Absolutely.
So first things first, right? Definitions. We toss around learning disability all the time. But is that like officially the same thing as a specific learning disorder, according to the DSM-5 hierarchy? The big book of diagnoses.
It's all about precision, isn't it?
Yeah.
Learning disability is, it's a very general term. But for a formal diagnosis, we use specific learning disorder.
Okay.
And then there's this whole other world, this world of communication disorders, which zero in on language, speech, communication itself.
Okay.
Language disorders, speech sound disorders, stuttering that's in there, and social communication disorder, too.
So really distinct categories here, not just, a general, oh, this person's having trouble learning kind of thing.
Right, right.
But before we get lost in the specifics, zoom out for a sec. Big picture, how does language even develop? I mean, like from the very beginning.
It's like this amazing dance between, nature and nurture. Infants, they come pre-wired with this just incredible capacity for language, but they need a stimulating environment to really make it happen.
It's like having the ingredients but not the recipe.
Yeah, exactly. Like they've got all the ingredients for a cake, but someone's got to show them how to bake it.
Okay, so they're primed for language, but it takes interaction, exposure, all that to actually make those skills come to life. What's happening up there in those little brains in those early years?
Picture this. Here. As babies hear the sounds of their native language, their brains start creating these perceptual maps.
Perceptual maps.
Yeah, like a mental filing system for all those sound, the phonemes in their hearing.
So they're building a sound library, basically, and that becomes the foundation for speaking.
Right.
It reminds me of, how much easier it is to learn languages as a kid. Like your brain's just a sponge soaking everything up.
Exactly, yeah. And as all this is happening, one crucial skill that starts to develop is called phonological awareness.
Phonological awareness.
It's the ability to understand the connections between sounds and letters, recognizing rhymes, breaking words down into syllables.
So phonological awareness is like this bridge between spoken and written language.
Precisely.
And if that bridge is, kind of wobbly, it makes sense that reading could become a real struggle.
Exactly.
And that's where we start to see that connection between those early communication issues and then the problems with reading and writing that can pop up later.
Right.
But let's take a closer look at those communication disorders themselves.
Okay.
We mentioned language disorders earlier, and Jackie's case, I think, really brings this to life. She's 3, super bright, but she gets so frustrated because she just can't express herself.
It's heartbreaking when you think about it, So much is going on in a child's mind, but they just don't have the tools to get it out.
Yeah.
It's like having this beautiful symphony in your head, but you can't play the notes. And that's the essence of a language disorder. They struggle to understand or produce language, in the same way their peers do. Limited vocabulary, simple sentences, conversations can be just incredibly challenging.
So it's more than like this mispronouncing a word here or there. It's a deeper issue with, the very building blocks of language.
Yeah, exactly.
And then we have speech sound disorders, which are all about, how you actually articulate those sounds.
Right.
Remember Caleb, who's 6 and still says wag it for rabbit.
Yeah.
I mean, I can only imagine how frustrating it must be to know what you want to say, but those words just don't come out right.
And it really can impact their confidence. I mean, these kids know what they want to say, but the sounds just don't cooperate. It can range from like a slight lisp to speech that's almost impossible to understand. And then, of course, gets stuttering, which adds another layer of complexity to this whole thing.
Yeah.
We've got Syed, 4 years old. His speech keeps getting stuck, and there's a family history of stuttering.
Syed's case makes me think about, this question I've always had. Is stuttering really caused by anxiety? Or is there something else going on?
That's a great question, and it's a myth that needs to be busted, really. Stuttering actually has a strong genetic component.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like 70% of the cause is genetics.
Wow.
It's like inheriting, well, a predisposition to certain speech patterns.
So it's not about being nervous or shy or anything like that. It's how their brains are wired for speech production.
Exactly. And then we have our newcomer to the DSM-5-TR, which is social communication disorder.
Ooh, I'm curious about this one. What sets it apart from the other communication disorders we've been talking about?
This one focuses on the social use of language. These kids might speak fluently, articulate clearly, all that, but those nuances of social interaction, that's where they struggle.
So it's less about the mechanics of language and more about understanding the, unspoken rules of communication.
Exactly. They have a hard time, well, using communication for social purposes, adapting to different situations, understanding unspoken meanings, following all those subtle cues that, well, that most of us pick up on without even thinking about it.
So, they're missing the social rule book for language. And that can lead to, misunderstandings and awkward situations.
Exactly.
And you can imagine how those communication challenges, especially in the social realm, can really impact a child's experience when they, enter the school system.
Absolutely.
And that's where those learning disorders often come into sharper focus, right? Especially if those earlier communication issues haven't been fully addressed.
Precisely.
Right. It's like those early challenges that kind of lay the groundwork for academic struggles later on. So let's shift gears a little and talk about those specific learning disorders, SLDs.
Okay.
When we say SLDs, we're talking about, well, it's an unexpected academic underachievement. These are kids who are totally capable of learning, but they hit a wall when it comes to, specific areas like reading, writing, or math.
Right.
Okay, so it's not about intelligence or lack of effort or anything like that. It's a very specific roadblock in, one or more of those academic areas. And I think let's start with reading, since that seems to be a common one. We've got Caleb again, who just can't seem to, crack the code when it comes to reading.
Yeah, and what's interesting about reading is that there are actually two systems at play. One is slow, deliberate, focuses on individual sounds.
Okay.
And the other is fast, automatic, recognizes whole words. Struggling readers, they often get stuck in that slower system, relying on memorization, and it just makes reading a real chore.
It's like they're constantly trying to, sound out each word instead of just recognizing it right away.
Exactly.
And they make those, characterologic errors, right? Like reversing letters or, skipping parts of words.
Exactly.
Reversals, transpositions, inversions, omissions, all those things.
Those are often, telltale signs for teachers. Imagine, looking at the word palace and seeing place. The frustration can be immense.
It's like trying to solve a puzzle, but the pieces keep changing shape.
Exactly.
And then we have SLD with impairment in written expression. I'm thinking of Carlos, our 7-year-old, who'd rather use a computer mouse than, pick up a pencil.
Yeah, in Carlos's case, it shows how this goes beyond just, messy handwriting. It's a struggle with spelling, grammar, organizing thoughts on paper.
Right.
Their ideas might be clear in their heads, but getting them down in writing, it feels impossible.
Like they're trapped in a world of jumbled sentences and misspelled words, and it can make them so self-conscious about their work.
Absolutely.
Even if they have brilliant ideas to share.
Exactly.
And then, of course, we have SLD with impairment in mathematics, which brings Francine back into the spotlight, our, number-phobic friend.
Right.
Remember, she had trouble with spatial concepts, even just adding coins.
Classic example.
That's this disorder in action, right?
Exactly. Math involves so many different skills, right? Basic computation, understanding those spatial relationships, problem solving, you name it. Any of these can be a problem for kids with this SLD. Even something as basic as like subitizing, being able to just instantly recognize small quantities without counting can be a hurdle.
Wait, subitizing?
Yeah.
I've never heard that term before.
It's a fascinating ability that most of us, we take for granted. Like, you can glance at a small group of objects, say 4 apples on a table, and instantly know how many there are without, stopping to count them one by one. That's subitizing.
Oh, okay.
And for kids with math learning disorders, that instant recognition might not be there. Even simple calculations feel overwhelming.
Like their mathematical intuition is just, not firing the way it does for other kids.
Yeah.
So we've got these 3 core areas, reading, writing, and math. But what's really at the root of these challenges? What's going on in the brain that leads to these difficulties?
That's where things get really interesting. It's a complex interplay of genetics, brain development, and the environment.
Okay, so not just one thing, it's a combination of factors. What about genetics? What do we know about that?
Well, we know that genetics plays a very significant role. And it's not like there's this, single learning disorder gene. It's more about inheriting a predisposition, a vulnerability, if you will, to these challenges.
So like inheriting a set of cards that might make you more likely to, struggle in certain areas, but it doesn't guarantee you will.
Exactly. And then there's the brain itself. Research has shown that kids with learning disorders often have these subtle differences in brain structure and function, particularly in areas related to, language processing. Their neural wiring for certain tasks, it's just a little bit different.
So their brains might be taking a slightly different route to process information, which can lead to those roadblocks we've been talking about. But if it's all about, brain wiring, does that mean there's no hope?
Not at all. I mean, the brain is incredibly adaptable.
Okay.
With the right interventions, the right support, we can actually see changes in brain activity. It's remarkable what the brain can do when we give it the right tools and opportunities. But we can't forget about the environment. A child's experiences, especially early on, can play a huge role in how these disorders manifest.
Hmm.
A nurturing, stimulating environment, that can make a world of difference. But a negative or neglectful environment, that can really exacerbate those challenges.
So it's this intricate dance between, well, nature and nurture, genes and experience. And it sounds like we're still learning a lot about how that all works together.
Absolutely.
But I'm curious about the long-term impact. What happens to these kids as they grow up?
Well, the long-term impacts can be significant, both emotionally and practically. Imagine constantly feeling like you're falling short, struggling with tasks that seem easy for everyone else. That takes a toll on your self-esteem.
It's like carrying this invisible weight that no one else can see.
Exactly. And sadly, that can lead to anxiety, mood disorders, even behavior problems.
Right.
And it's crucial to understand that these disorders, they're lifelong and the challenges might evolve over time. But the good news is that with the right support, people can learn to compensate and lead, fulfilling lives.
So early intervention, that's key, right? The sooner we identify these disorders and provide support, the better the chances of, mitigating those long-term consequences.
Absolutely. Early identification and intervention can make a world of difference. And, it's interesting. Research has shown that there are some gender differences in how these disorders play out in adulthood.
Oh, really? That's fascinating. Tell me more about that.
Well, studies have shown that women with learning disorders often face more challenges in adulthood, likely due to, societal factors and expectations.
So they're hit with this double whammy, the challenges of the disorder itself, plus those societal barriers they encounter. That's a really important point to consider. But let's shift gears and talk about solutions.
Okay.
What are some things we can do to help these kids thrive?
Well, I think the first step is recognizing that these are neurodevelopmental disorders. They're not character flaws. These kids aren't lazy. They're not unmotivated. Their brains are just wired differently.
Right. It's about understanding that these are, real challenges that deserve to be addressed with compassion and effective interventions.
Exactly. And that's where the inclusion movement has been so important. The goal is to integrate kids with special needs into regular classrooms, giving them the opportunity to learn alongside their peers, to feel that sense of belonging, to benefit from, a diverse learning environment.
So it's not about, segregating them or labeling them as different. It's about creating a more inclusive and supportive learning environment for everyone.
Precisely.
And then there's, response to intervention, RTI. It's all about providing like tailored support based on a child's specific needs, like creating a personalized roadmap for learning, making sure they get the specific help they need.
Exactly.
But let's talk about instructional methods. Are there certain approaches that are particularly effective for kids with learning disorders?
Absolutely. One approach that's got a strong track record is called direct instruction.
Okay.
It's all about breaking down those complex tasks into smaller, more manageable steps, providing very clear and explicit instructions, and lots of opportunities for practice and feedback.
Like building a house, brick by brick, making sure each layer is solid before you move on to the next. No ambiguity, just clear, structured learning.
Precisely. And for kids who struggle with more traditional teaching methods, that structure and clarity can be a game changer. Helps them build confidence as they master each step, rather than feeling, overwhelmed and discouraged.
It makes sense. But what about those kids who need even more individualized support? Are there other approaches that might be helpful?
Absolutely. one approach that's, gaining a lot of traction these days is called Universal Design for Learning, or UDL.
I've heard that term before, but I'm not entirely sure what it means. Can you break it down for me?
Sure, it's a framework for creating those flexible learning environments that can accommodate, well, a wide range of learners, including those with disabilities.
Okay.
It's about providing multiple means of representation, engagement, and, action and expression.
Okay, so instead of that one-size-fits-all approach, it's about offering different ways to, access the material, stay engaged, and demonstrate understanding.
Exactly. So, for instance, if we're talking about multiple means of representation, it might mean providing information in both visual and auditory formats, or, offering different levels of complexity to meet different learners' needs.
Okay.
And then, if we're talking about multiple means of engagement, it might mean offering choices in how students approach a task, or providing opportunities for collaboration, peer learning, things like that.
So it's about recognizing that, there are many different ways to learn and giving students that flexibility to find what works best for them.
Exactly. And then when we talk about multiple means of action and expression, it's about giving students different ways to show what they know.
Okay.
Maybe allowing them to choose between a written report or a multimedia presentation, or providing options for assistive technology.
It's about leveling the playing field, giving every student a chance to succeed.
Couldn't agree more. And, one of the most important things we can do for these kids is help them develop self-advocacy skills.
Right, because if they can, articulate their needs and ask for help, that can make a world of difference in their educational journey.
Absolutely. It's about empowering them to active participants in their learning, to know their rights, and to feel comfortable speaking up for themselves.
Hmm.
And that can have a ripple effect throughout their lives, not just in school, but in, well, all aspects of their lives.
It's about giving them the tools to navigate a world that might not always understand their challenges or, be set up to meet their needs.
Right.
But let's talk about technology for a moment. It seems like, technology has this potential to really revolutionize learning for these kids, providing tools and resources that can level the playing field in ways we never even thought possible before.
I completely agree.
We've touched on some examples like, text-to-speech software and those interactive learning platforms, but the possibilities are truly endless.
Yeah, and for kids with reading disorders, there are apps that can scan text and read it aloud, or software that highlights words as they're being read.
That's amazing. It's like having a, personal reading tutor right there at their fingertips.
Exactly. And then for kids with writing difficulties, there are those word prediction programs that can help them spell, grammar checkers to flag errors and suggest corrections.
It's like having a built-in editor to help them get those thoughts down and express themselves more clearly.
Precisely. And then for kids who have a hard time with math, there are calculators that can show the steps involved in solving a problem, or virtual manipulatives that let them explore math concepts in a hands-on way.
So it's like giving them this visual and interactive way to understand those abstract concepts that, might just not click on paper.
Exactly. And technology can also be really helpful for those kids who have, difficulty paying attention.
Right?
There are apps that can help them stay focused and organized, timers to break down tasks into smaller chunks.
Like a personal assistant to help them manage their time and stay on track.
Precisely. And the great thing about technology is that it's constantly evolving. There are always new tools and resources being developed, and it's exciting to see how those innovations are, changing the game for kids with disabilities.
It's like giving them this whole new toolbox of strategies and supports to help them, really unlock their potential.
Absolutely.
But I'm curious about the, the social emotional side of things. How can technology be used to support those aspects of development?
That's a great question. And, technology can actually be very helpful in this area as well.
Oh, okay.
For example, there are social skills training programs that use, video modeling and role-playing to help kids learn appropriate social behaviors.
So it's like giving them this safe and controlled environment to practice those skills that, well, they might feel really awkward or overwhelming in real-life situations.
Exactly.
And I know there are, online communities and support groups where kids with learning disorders can connect with others who get it, share their experiences,
Yeah, that can be so powerful.
creating that sense of belonging,
Right.
letting them know they're not alone.
Exactly.
Like finding your tribe,
Hmm.
a group of people who just get it.
Right.
And technology can also be helpful for, parents and teachers. There are just tons of websites, apps, online resources that provide, information, support, guidance. It's like having this whole team of experts right there at your fingertips, ready to answer questions and offer support. But with all these amazing tools and resources, I do wonder about the potential downsides. Are there risks or challenges we should be aware of when it comes to, technology and learning disorders?
That's a really important question. And like any tool, technology well, it can be used for good or bad. It's just so crucial to be mindful of those potential risks and to use it in a way that, truly supports learning and well-being.
So it's not just about, throwing technology at the problem and hoping for the best. It's about using it thoughtfully and strategically. What are some specific risks, like things to watch out for?
Well, one concern is that, technology can be distracting. If kids aren't using it in a focused, a purposeful way, it can easily become, well, a source of procrastination or entertainment rather than a tool for learning.
Right, that's like having a TV in the classroom. It could be a great tool, but it can also be a huge distraction. What are some other, potential downsides?
Another thing to be mindful of is that technology can sometimes create, a sense of isolation.
Oh, right.
If kids spend all their time interacting with screens, they might miss out on those face-to-face interactions that are so, so crucial for social and emotional development.
It's like the difference between texting a friend and actually, hanging out with them in person. You can convey information through text, but you miss all those nonverbal cues, the shared laughter, the real emotional connection.
Exactly. And then there's the issue of, digital literacy. Not all kids have equal access to technology or the skills to use it effectively.
That's a good point. We need to make sure that technology is being used to bridge those gaps, not make them worse.
Absolutely. And there's always the concern that technology might be seen as this quick fix, a substitute for good teaching or individualized support.
Right. There's important to remember that technology is a tool, not a cure-all. It can be really powerful, but it's not magic.
Couldn't agree more. And that brings us back to the importance of, well, human connection.
Yeah.
These kids need caring adults in their lives, parents, teachers, therapists, who can guide them, support them, and celebrate their strengths.
It's about recognizing that technology can, it can enhance learning and open up possibilities, but it can never replace the power of human connection.
Beautifully said. And, as we've been talking about all these different approaches and interventions, I keep coming back to just the incredible resilience and adaptability of these kids.
Yeah.
They face challenges that most of us, well, we can't even imagine. And yet they find ways to learn, to grow, to thrive.
It's really inspiring. They remind us that the human spirit is capable of, well, overcoming just incredible obstacles,
Mm-hmm.
and that with the right support, the right understanding, these kids can achieve, well, amazing things.
I couldn't agree more. Their stories are a testament to the power of perseverance, to believing in yourself, and to the transformative power of human connection. And, I think it's important to remember that every child's journey is different.
Right.
There's no one-size-fits-all approach to supporting kids with, communication and learning disorders.
That makes sense. What works for one child might not work for another. It's about finding the right combination of approaches and supports to really help each child reach their full potential.
Exactly. And that might involve a mix of, educational interventions, therapy, technology, and of course, a loving and supportive environment. It's about creating this team where everyone, the child, the parents, the teachers, the therapists, are all working together
Right.
toward that common goal.
It's about recognizing that every child has something special to offer,
Mm-hmm.
and that our job is to help them find their voice, share their gifts, let them shine.
Beautifully said. And, as we go deeper into this topic, I think it's important to acknowledge that the conversation around learning differences, it's constantly evolving.
That's true. What are some of those, emerging trends, areas of research that you're excited about?
Well, one that's really gaining traction is this idea of neurodiversity.
I've heard that term before, but to be honest, I'm not entirely sure what it means.
Sure. It's a framework that challenges that, traditional deficit model of disability, which, tends to view certain neurological differences as inherently problematic. Neurodiversity, on the other hand, embraces those differences as part of the, natural variation of the human brain.
Yeah.
We embrace diversity in race, ethnicity, gender, all that.
So instead of trying to fix those differences, it's about celebrating them and finding ways to support individuals with those differences to thrive in a world that's not always designed for them.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that different brains have, well, different strengths and challenges, and those differences can lead to a richer, more diverse society.
It's a beautiful way to look at it. It's about shifting the focus from disability to, different ability.
Precisely. And the neurodiversity movement is really changing how we talk about learning and disability, challenging us to rethink of those assumptions, to be more inclusive in our approaches, and to create learning environments that really honor the the unique strengths and needs of every single learner.
It's about, moving away from that one-size-fits-all model and embracing the beauty of human variation.
Couldn't agree more. And I think that's a powerful message to leave our listeners with. Communication and learning disorders, they can be tough, but they don't have to define a person's life.
Right.
With the right support, understanding, and a belief in their potential, these kids can thrive and achieve, really incredible things. And as we learn more about the brain and embrace, this concept of neurodiversity, I'm hopeful that we'll see even more progress in the years to come.
It's an exciting time to be in this field. There's so much more to learn, and I can't wait to see how those discoveries will lead to more attractive interventions and, a more inclusive society.
I couldn't agree more. It's a journey of discovery, both for the individuals who are, navigating these challenges and for the researchers and educators who are working to support them.
It really is. Well, we've covered a ton today.
We have.
From understanding what these disorders actually are to exploring the latest research and, potential interventions. It's been quite a ride.
It really has.
And I think the biggest takeaway for our listeners is this. Communication and learning disorders are, they're complex, but they're not insurmountable. With the right support, with understanding, with a belief in their potential, these kids could do incredible things. So to our listener who requested this deep dive, we hope we've given you a good understanding of these disorders, the challenges they present, and, it's just the amazing resilience of the human spirit.
And remember, knowledge is power. The more we understand about these disorders, the better we'll be able to support the children and adults who are, dealing with these challenges every day.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for sticking with us on this deep dive. We're going to pick up right where we left off, exploring those amazing brains behind these disorders.
Yeah, because I'm still kind of blown away by the idea that, brains can actually change and adapt throughout our lives. Like, that just seems so counterintuitive to what I always thought about, like, how the brain works.
Right. It's this amazing concept called neuroplasticity, and it really is a game changer for how we think about learning and development.
Okay, so explain that to me. Neuroplasticity, what does that even mean? Like, for someone who doesn't know anything about brain science.
Imagine, like a forest path. The more you walk that path, the more defined and clear it becomes. And that's kind of what happens in the brain. With practice and experience, those neural pathways, those connections between brain cells, they become stronger and more efficient.
So even if a child is struggling with, let's say, reading or math, those pathways can still be strengthened. Like, it's not a lost cause.
Absolutely not. It just might take a little more effort and the right kind of support to build those pathways. Think of it like, exercising a muscle. It takes time and effort to build strength, but it's definitely possible.
Okay, that's a great analogy. So how do we actually, harness this neuroplasticity? What are some interventions that can really make a difference?
One area that's showing a lot of promise is educational therapy. It involves working with a therapist who specializes in learning disorders, someone who can really assess those strengths and weaknesses and create a plan that targets those specific areas.
So it's like a personal trainer for the brain.
Yeah, exactly. Someone who can guide them through exercises and strategies that are, tailor-made for their needs.
I love that, a brain trainer. So what are some examples of what that, educational therapy might look like?
Well, it really depends on, the child's specific needs. But for instance, if a child struggles with reading, they might work on things like phonemic awareness, those sounds and letter connections, decoding strategies, fluency building, things like that.
Right, it's about breaking those complex skills down into, manageable steps, giving them the tools and strategies to succeed. But we can't forget about that emotional side, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's not just about those academic skills. It's also about nurturing their emotional well-being, helping them develop a strong, positive self-image.
Because if they don't believe in themselves, it's going to be 10 times harder to, make progress.
Exactly. And that's where therapy, particularly cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, can be so powerful. It can help kids identify those negative thoughts that might be holding them back. And then, challenge those thoughts, replace them with more positive and realistic ones.
It's like giving them a top kit to, to reframe their thinking. So what about parents and teachers? What can they do in everyday life to support these kids?
I think the most important thing is to approach these challenges with empathy and understanding. These kids aren't lazy. They're not trying to be difficult. They're up against some real neurological hurdles.
It's about shifting that mindset from, blame to support. Instead of saying, why aren't you trying harder? We need to be asking, what can I do to help?
Exactly. And that might mean, providing extra time on assignments, breaking tasks down into smaller pieces, allowing for like alternative ways of completing work.
Right, like if a child struggles with writing, maybe they can, record their thoughts instead of writing them down, or use some assistive technology to help them type. It's about finding those workarounds that honor their strengths and, minimize those areas of difficulty.
Absolutely. And it's about celebrating those small wins, acknowledging their effort, helping them build that sense of, hey, I can do this.
Because those little moments of success can be so motivating.
Right. It helps them build that resilience they need to, keep pushing forward.
Absolutely. And I think it's crucial for parents and teachers to, be advocates for these kids.
Yes.
Make sure they're getting the support they need in school and outside of school.
Definitely. That might mean working with the school to get an IEP, an individualized education plan in place,
Right.
or connecting with, therapists or other professionals who can provide that specialized support. And it also means being aware of their rights and, advocating for those rights when needed.
It's like being a champion for those kids,
Exactly.
making sure their voices are heard,
Right.
making sure their needs are met. But I'm also wondering about the role of the kids themselves in all this.
Mm-hmm.
How can we, empower them to advocate for themselves, take ownership of their learning?
That's a great question. And I think it starts with helping them understand their own learning styles, their own unique challenges.
So it's like giving them that self-awareness,
Exactly.
that understanding of, okay, this is how my brain works, and these are the strategies that might be helpful for me.
Exactly. And then it's about teaching them how to communicate those needs to others, whether it's, asking for extra time on a test or explaining to a teacher why a certain assignment is, really difficult.
It's about giving them the language and the confidence to stand up for themselves, not just in the classroom, but in life in general. But let's talk about technology for a minute. We've talked about how technology can be this amazing tool for learning, but are there specific ways it can be used to, really support kids with communication and learning disorders?
Oh, absolutely. Technology can be a complete game changer for these kids. I mean, we're all walking around with these, super powerful mini computers in our pockets, and there are apps for just about everything these days, and many of them are specifically designed to support kids with, learning differences.
So it's not just about using technology for, entertainment or whatever. It's about using it for learning, for support.
Exactly. For instance, for those kids who have a hard time reading, there are text-to-speech apps that can read aloud any text, books, websites, emails, you name it. There are also apps that can help with, decoding words, building vocabulary, improving reading fluency.
It's like having a personal reading tutor on demand.
Right. And for writing, there are word prediction programs to help with spelling, grammar checkers to catch errors, even apps to help with, organizing thoughts and structuring their writing.
Like a built-in editor and writing coach all in one. What about math?
Oh, for math, there are some fantastic apps that can take those abstract math concepts and turn them into like these visual interactive experiences.
Okay.
Makes them way more engaging and less intimidating. There are calculators that show you the steps involved in solving a problem so kids can understand the process instead of just memorizing formulas. And then there are apps that, turn math into a game, which makes learning fun and rewarding.
That's amazing. Technology can take these subjects that can feel so scary, so intimidating, and make them less so. Like it's leveling the playing field in a way that wasn't possible before. But with all these benefits, are there any downsides or risks to be aware of?
That's a great point. Like any tool, technology can be a double-edged sword. It's crucial to use it thoughtfully, strategically, always with the child's best interests in mind.
Right. So it's not about, just giving them an iPad and hoping for the best.
Exactly.
It's about using it in a way that actually supports their learning and their overall well-being.
Right. And it's important to remember that technology is just one piece of the puzzle.
Right.
It can be a powerful tool, but it's not a replacement for, good teaching, individualized support, and that human connection. That's so important for all of us.
Yeah, finding that balance, right?
Mm-hmm.
Using technology to, enhance learning, but also making sure those kids are getting real-world interaction, personalized support, the things they need to really thrive. It really is about finding that balance. But, it's something we haven't talked about yet is, well, if these disorders are really rooted in, like, actual brain differences, doesn't that mean they're kind of permanent? Like, is there any hope for actual, improvement?
That's where this amazing thing called neuroplasticity comes in.
Neuroplasticity.
It's the brain's ability to change, to adapt, and, it happens throughout our lives.
Okay, so the brain's not, like, fixed. It can rewire itself?
Exactly. It's not set in stone.
Hmm.
Think of it like, I don't know, a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets, right? Well,
Yeah.
the brain's kind of similar. With targeted interventions, with consistent practice, you can actually strengthen those neural pathways, the ones involved in reading, writing, math, all those things.
So even if a child is, really struggling, there's still potential for them to, like, grow and improve. Okay, that's good to hear. But what does that look like, in real life? What are some of those interventions that can actually, tap into that neuroplasticity?
One that's showing a lot of promise is educational therapy. It involves working with a therapist who really specializes in learning disorders.
Okay.
They can assess the child's, strengths and weaknesses, create this personalized plan that really targets those specific areas.
So kind of like a personal trainer, but for the brain?
Yeah, exactly.
I like that.
Someone to guide them through exercises and strategies that are tailor-made, for what they need.
Awesome. So what are some examples of, what that educational therapy might involve?
Well, it really varies depending on, the child and their specific needs. But let's say a child's having a tough time with reading.
Okay.
They might work on phonemic awareness, those sound letter connections we talked about earlier, decoding strategies, fluency building, things like that.
It's about, taking those big, complicated skills and breaking them down into smaller steps.
Right.
Giving those kids tools, strategies they can actually use. But we can't forget the emotional side of all this, right?
Oh, absolutely not. It's not just about those academic skills. It's about, helping these kids feel good about themselves, helping them build confidence.
'Cause if they don't believe in themselves, I mean, it's going to be that much harder to make progress, right?
Exactly. And that's where, therapy, especially cognitive behavioral therapy, can be really, really valuable. Helps kids identify and challenge those, negative thought patterns, those beliefs that might be holding them back.
It's like giving them the tools to reframe those thoughts, to develop a more, I don't know, a more positive and realistic view of themselves and what they're capable of. So going back to, parents and teachers, what can they do, like, on a daily basis to really support these kids?
That's a great question. And I think the key is approaching these, these challenges with empathy,
Okay.
with understanding. Remember, these kids aren't lazy. They're not trying to get out of work. Their brains just work differently.
It's about shifting that mindset, right?
Yeah.
From blame to support. Instead of saying, why aren't you trying harder? It's more like, what can I do to help you succeed?
Exactly. And that might mean, giving them extra time for assignments.
Right.
Maybe breaking tasks down into smaller chunks, allowing them to, complete assignments in different ways.
Right. Like if writing's a challenge, maybe they can, I don't know, record their answers verbally or use assistive technology. Find those workarounds that, really play to their strengths and minimize those areas where they struggle.
Exactly. And it's about celebrating those small victories, acknowledging their effort,
Right.
helping them build that sense of, hey, I can do this.
Because those little successes can be huge motivators.
Absolutely. And I also think it's so important for parents and teachers to be advocates for these kids,
Yeah.
Make sure they're getting the support they need both in school and outside of school.
Right.
That might mean, working with the school to get an IEP in place, connecting with therapists, other professionals who can offer specialized help.
Right.
And it also means being aware of their rights,
Yeah.
advocating for those rights when needed. It's like being a champion for those kids,
It really is.
making sure their voices are heard, making sure their needs are met.
Absolutely. But what about the kids themselves? How do we empower them to advocate for themselves, to, like, really take charge of their own learning?
That's a great question. And I think it starts with, helping them understand their own learning style, their own challenges.
It's about giving them that, that self-awareness,
Exactly.
that understanding of, like, okay, this is how my brain works, and these are the things that might help me.
Exactly. And then it's about giving them the tools to communicate those needs to others, whether it's asking for extra time on a test or explaining to a teacher why a certain assignment is, really hard.
Right. It's about, like, giving them the words, giving them the confidence to stand up for themselves, not just in the classroom, but, in life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But, technology, we've talked about a lot today. It really could be an amazing tool. Are there specific ways that technology can, be used to support kids with communication and learning disorders?
Oh, absolutely. Technology, it can be a real game changer. I mean, think about it. We all carry around these mini supercomputers in our pockets these days. And, there are apps for almost everything.
Right.
And so many of them are specifically designed to support kids with, learning differences.
So it's not just about, playing games or whatever. It's about harnessing technology's power for learning and support.
Exactly. So for those kids struggling with reading, there are text-to-speech apps that can read aloud any text they come across.
Okay.
Books, websites, you name it. There are apps that can help them, decode words, build vocabulary, work on their fluency.
It's like having a personal reading tutor right there in their pocket. What about writing? Are there apps for that too?
Oh, tons. There are word prediction programs to help with spelling, grammar checkers that'll, catch errors, suggest corrections, even apps that can help them organize their thoughts and structure their writing.
So it's like a built-in editor, like a writing coach, all in one.
Exactly.
Amazing. And what about math? Anything to help make those numbers a little less scary?
Oh, absolutely. There are apps that can take those abstract math concepts and turn them into like visual interactive experiences, makes them so much more engaging and accessible. There are calculators that show you like step by step how to solve a problem.
Okay.
So kids can really understand the process, not just memorize formulas. And then of course there are tons of apps that turn math into a game, makes learning fun and rewarding.
Wow. So technology can really make those subjects that are, traditionally seen as so challenging, so intimidating, it can make them so much more, I don't know, approachable, accessible. Like we're leveling the playing field in a way that just wasn't possible before. But, with all the good stuff that technology brings, are there any, I don't know, any downsides, any risks we should be aware of?
That's a great question. And, like with any tool, technology can have, its drawbacks. It's really important to use it thoughtfully, strategically, always thinking about what's best for the child.
So it's not about, just throwing an iPad at a kid and hoping for the best.
Right.
It's about using technology with intention, making sure it's actually helping them.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that technology is, well, it's a tool.
Right.
It's not a magic solution. It can be incredibly powerful, but it can't replace good teaching. That individualized support, that human connection, all those things are so important.
Yeah, finding that balance, right? Using technology in a way that enhances learning, but still making sure those kids are getting that, real-world interaction and the individual attention they need.
Absolutely.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. We've explored what communication and learning disorders are, the challenges, the latest research, the interventions, and it's been a lot.
It really has.
But I think the biggest takeaway for our listeners, the one thing we want them to remember, is this. Communication and learning disorders are complex, but they're not, a life sentence.
Right.
With the right support, with understanding, and, with a belief in their potential, these kids can accomplish amazing things. So to our listener who requested this, this whole deep dive, we hope we've given you a really solid understanding of, what these disorders are, the challenges, and, just that incredible resilience that these kids have.
And remember, knowledge is power. And the more we understand about these disorders, the better equipped we'll be to support those kids and adults who are dealing with these challenges every day.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for sticking with us on this deep dive. We'll be back soon with another exploration of, the amazing world of the human mind.